So for Indian now, we have our creator, filmmaker, Kyle Higgins. Welcome once again.
Thank you. So nice to be here.
The massiverse is a big idea, especially in the space and creator comics. What was the spark that led to the creation of this massiverse and its crossovers?
Yeah, well, it comes from a few different places. The first is that I've always loved telling stories with my friends. Whether I was growing up making short films or in college making films or ultimately comic books. I always like to say the best part of making comics is the collaboration, but my favorite part is doing it is collaborating with people I like and all my friends. Okay. So when I was doing Power Rangers, after I finished, I was working on a few other projects, and an opportunity came up where Eric Stevenson, the publisher of Image, who I'm very close with, I've done a lot of books at Image over the years. Eric asked me in the fall of 2019 if he texted me and he said, "Hey, have I ever talked to you about building an original superhero?" And I wasn't quite sure what he meant by it. I said, "Well, not like a Batman or a Superman analog, but something contemporary. Think of it as optimist and sci-fi if you want." And I said, "Well, I would kill to do something like that, but I didn't think there would be a market for it. There's so many superhero books." But he very much thought there could be. And he said it's something that he's wanted to do for some time, to do more Raider on superhero books at Image. And that I should feel free to tell anyone, creator-wise, that I thought would be a good fit for something like that. So my first two calls were to Ryan Parrott, who's one of my best friends. We went to college together.
Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is writing right now.
Well, not anymore. He's done. Yeah, but he took over when I left.
After Shadow.
Yeah, he took over and he wrote 100+ issues of Power Rangers. And he ended up pitching me Rogue's Son like 2 days later. And then Matt Grew, who I met when I was doing Power Rangers, because he and Mike Urusudal have a Power Ranger podcast called Ranger Nature that they've done for 10 years now. Uncle. And Matt was already working on a book that became Inferno Girl Red. And I was the editor on it. And we had done a book with Eduardo, who's here, Ferriato, called Self-Made.
Yeah.
That book is also where I met Marcelo Costa, who's my Radiant Black co-creator, because Marcelo was the colorist on it. And so at a certain point, the books were not intended to be in the same universe initially.
Okay.
And then before issue 1 of Radiant Black came out, I'd had the idea that we could actually do this as something where we build out our own little corner of the Image superhero universe. And so we all jumped on a Zoom like late at night on a Saturday night. And it was me, and it was Ryan, and it was Matt, and it was Michael, the Sudal, who was editing and designing Radio Black. We're doing all the graphic design for Radio Black. And I pitched this idea about why don't we actually do this as a collective together. And the core part of it that was really important to us is that everything needed to be very accessible. So every book is designed to be its own thing. And all of the books are set in the same universe. Inferno Girl Red is like one universe over, but that's the only one. In our universe, Radiant Black is set in Chicago, Rogue's Son is set in New Orleans, No One is set in Pittsburgh. But by choosing different geographies and different cities, it makes it easier to kind of build out the world of that specific character in that specific book in a way where it's not reliant on any of the other books. And then once a year, we do a special for Supermassive.
Yeah,
And so it's about designing those stories so that the Supermassives are additive but not necessary. If you've never read any of the books, but you just pick up Supermassive, you'll learn everything you need to know in that story to have a full, satisfying narrative experience. If you've read the other books before that Supermassive you'll find is actually a continuation of all of the characters' story arcs up to that point. So it works on multiple levels, again, keeping it modular so that everything's accessible.
Wonderful. My next question is, you've been writing about transforming superheroes for more than a decade now. How have you transformed as a writer from the time you set out to be in this industry?
Yeah. Well, I think it's always a process. Like you're always changing and evolving and hopefully growing as any sort of creator. And it's like anything. The longer you do something, the better you hopefully get at it. So I think I've just gotten better to start with. I'm more consistent. But I would say that over the years, especially Power Rangers really had a big effect on me as a writer. I became more comfortable with two important things in storytelling, which is optimism and ambiguity. And so writing with hope and writing about things that are more optimistic was something that I didn't gravitate towards as a younger writer. And it's probably for the same reason that I think a lot of younger writers want to do dark and edgy things about, the complexities and fallacies of man.
The human conditions.
Exactly. And it's like there's definitely a place for that. But the irony is that most of the time you're trying to write that type of material because you feel like that's the stuff that will be taken the most seriously. And ironically, you probably are at an age where you have the least interesting perspective
Yeah.
and the least interesting thing to say about the very topics that you are trying to explore.
Yes.
Because you are trying to do things that feel more, significant. Um, then maybe you actually have a perspective as you get. And the other thing happening when you're a younger writer, for me anyway, was that there's this level of insecurity that you have and kind of imposter syndrome. And we all have that to some degree, even going forward, like throughout your whole career. But that level of that kind of insecurity and imposter syndrome is where some of that, for me anyway, like, well, I want to make sure, this stuff is really, really, it's deep and thematically, significant. But that also comes down to even your plotting. Like, you want everything to be like, a Christopher Nolan movie where everything is meticulously, but it has like clockwork. Yep. And I think that sometimes, especially I look at my old Nightwing work, and there were a lot of reasons for it. It was a very challenging era to be writing comics at DC, and it's especially as a young creator. But I noticed that like the character there were a lot of stories where he ends up like self-actualizing by the end, where it's like he's speaking or articulating about kind of what the arc has been in a way that people don't really do.
Yeah.
But it's a writer trying to make everything very clearly defined. And I think finding that level of comfortability with ambiguity is important, because there is a larger point to every story, but I don't think you don't have to hit things over the head as hard as probably I think you do when you're starting out. So those are probably the two biggest things that I've kind of the way I've grown, and also just really honing and refining my approach. What I think, the tenets that I think make for a good story. Now that I creative direct for other creators as well, but then also a way of thinking about storytelling across different mediums, so that it's more of a multi-year.
Try a lot. You've got a podcast, got a video, audiobook.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my next question is congratulations on the movie.
Oh,
The No One. And how is it shaping up, and when can we expect it to release worldwide? And can you elaborate more on the No One format and its connect to the masses?
Sure. So for those who don't know, so No One is it's our true crime superhero series in the massiverse. It's set in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in America, and it's kind of our it's a Batman-esque character. I would describe him as. It's a very contemporary kind of urban vigilante, but it follows this accountability killing movement that sparks in the city, in part because of this digital hacktivist named No One, who doxes these four very corrupt people and then nothing's done about it. So someone in the city starts killing them, and that sparks this larger ideological movement about accountability. So the no one character becomes like a physical presence, and his identity is like one of the core mysteries of the book. Two of the characters in the book are newspaper reporters who are talked into starting a podcast chronicling their investigation into not only this accountability movement, but also into no one's identity. So we actually made that podcast as a scripted audio series for every issue. All of the websites where no one doxes the people, we made those as well. All of the newspaper articles, we hired a crime reporter to come and write those with us. So all of this material exists as a part of the story experience. At the end of it all, there's a trailer that we released in July of last year.
I do sell you pretty great trade.
Yes, it's a live action trailer we shot that announces where a story is continuing in a feature film, but the film is a documentary. If you're listening to just audio, I'm using air quotes around documentary. So it's a fake documentary, but the intention is that everyone who voices the characters on the podcast will play them in front of camera for the movie.
Is this the same podcast in the artist from the Batman animated series?
Yeah, well, yeah. So the voice of no one is Lauren Lester, who is the voice of Dick Grayson, Robin, and Nightwing on Batman the animated series. Yeah, we have an amazing cast for the audio.
And Sim Rhodes also is part of it.
Kim Rhodes is a part of it. Patton Oswalt. Oh no. Kim Rhodes is a part of our Radiant Black audio. Oh, okay. Lauren Lester is also voicing in the Radiant Black.
Yes, I heard it. And Nathan Bird is the father?
He's playing Nathan Scott. Yeah. And then, but for no one, the film is, we're working on it. Brian Bushelato and I are writing it, and I'm directing it. So we're still working on the script right now. We want to shoot it this year. We'll see if we do. It might be early next year. Realistically, we'll see. Our financiers are very excited. They're waiting on us to get the script into the shape we want it to be in. So we'll have more news on it. My guess is probably by the summer we'll have more news on when exactly it's going to be.
And thanks for getting Troy Baker as Shiftle, one of my favorite characters.
Oh, for the audiobook? For the audio? Yeah, Troy's amazing. Yeah, Troy's actually part of why Troy agreed to do the Radiant Black audiobook is because I walked him through No One and the whole experience, and he was very impressed by it. So he's been amazing.
Wonderful, and congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And in regards to deep cuts,
Yeah.
One of my favorite books. What is the one thing you hope that somebody who doesn't appreciate music would get out of a book like, The History of Jazz?
Yeah. Well, the cool thing about deep cuts is that it's specifically intended to not be about the history of jazz. Okay. What I mean by that is a lot of books about jazz tend to be very academic.
Yes.
And they tend to be very, there are very few books that are about, that really feel like they're exploring the life of a musician or a gig player or a session player or a critic or, people that are actually, living and breathing this material. So we wanted to do a story that was less about necessarily the history of the art form and more about exploring some of the people who live and breathe it.
Yeah.
And so every issue takes place in a different decade of American history and music. But there's a thread that connects all 6 issues across 70 years. The way that something that you create in one era might be appreciated in a different era and inspire future generations of creators is kind of like the core point of Deep Cuts. Joe and I really wanted to tell a story that looked to kind of recontextualize the ideas of success and failure, especially when it comes to art and creation.
I wish Joe had come here. And
I do too. He would love it. He would love it.
He was a childhood friend?
Yeah, Joe Clark. Joe and I went to high school together, so we've known each other since we were 13, and we've worked on projects together literally since then. He used to score my short films, and he's an incredible musician and composer in Chicago, a trumpet player. And now he writes Radiant Black with me and Deep Cuts, and yeah, he's amazing. Really very talented guy.
True crossburs.
Yeah, exactly.
And, Carl, I want regarding your called 1964. Yeah, it was based on your college student film, The League. Tell us more. There's a lot of elements, noir aesthetic and political dramas that you're able to weave into this narrative.
Yeah.
And what inspired you to do that?
Well, I mean, part of it is probably some of the things I was talking about a minute ago about being a younger creator who wanted to be dark and edgy and things like that. I still like all that stuff, but I don't know. The world feels pretty dark and edgy right now as it is, and so I'm a little less interested in continuing to dive down that rabbit
That's
hole.
why you stopped after two issues.
What's it?
Carl, you stopped writing Foul. Is it because of that?
No. We stopped writing it because the sales weren't good. No, so we did. Well, Kyle, so Kyle started as a book 10 years ago, and we did 2 volumes of it. So we did 11 issues, and our intention was always to come back to it and do more. It just took us.
That's good news.
Yeah, it took us 10 years to do it, though. So now we're doing a mini series called Kyle 1964, and we have 1 issue left that we're working on now. It's late, but essentially, the book is based on my college film about a superhero labor union in 1960 Chicago. And so it's a look at both, politics of that era, not only federally, but locally in Chicago. So a very fascinating time period for labor unions in America, as well as just the change that the country was going through throughout the 60s. But then it also is looking at all that through the lens of superheroes in the transition from like the golden age and the silver age, where you're going from the flawless titans to the flawed gods. The flawless titans being like the Batmans, the Supermans, the Wonder Womans, the characters at DC that we could never be, but we look up to.
Yeah.
Then in the 60s, you have the flawed gods coming in out of Marvel, Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, and the Incredible Hulk and Daredevil. These characters built on these tragic, situations and flaws and exploring these problems of the everyman. It's the world outside your window. And so we thought it was really interesting, dating back 20 years at this point, we've been working on Kyle. Okay. We thought it was really interesting to allegorically look at that transition in American history as if the golden age heroes are clinging to power as the world is changing around them. And in the case of someone like Jeffrey Warner, who used to be this fantastic hero, he has sold his soul in order to maintain power. And we're looking at that kind of like corruption and breakdown of American institutions that happens all the time. At a certain point, it becomes more about self-preservation than it does the tenets that maybe first inspired, the work or the forming of the institution. So, it's a world we've spent a lot of time in. Alex Siegel and I, who co-created, Rod Reese, our illustrator, amazing art partner. And now that book is actually a part of the massiverse as well. So you'll be seeing, as Kyle 1964 wraps up, we'll start to see threads for different elements in Radiant Black and the massiverse that, they're 50 years later, but you'll start to see, that there are a little connection to us or things like that. Yeah.
And when can they expect this mini-series in 2025? Yeah.
Well, it's coming out, right? It's been coming out for last year as monthly comics. So the first 3 issues are
Unfortunate in India, we don't get these.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe we get only the collected.
No. So you'll get the collected edition later this year.
Oh, no.
Yes, we've put out 3 of the 4, and we're working on the 4th one right now.
Yeah, I'll say one first. Sure, you have whatever. You spoke about the Power Rangers and the influence of the Japanese cultural icons. What is your current take on anime and manga landscape? I mean, what is the property or a franchise you would love to be a part of, write, direct?
It's a great question. I don't know that there's any that there's none in manga or anime that I would personally want to go be a part of, because just where I'm at now, I'm much more interested in building my own worlds and my own stories. The only property that I would still kill to do something with is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which obviously is not anime or manga. but I love the turtles. I have since I was very, very young, and they're the one brand that I haven't worked with that I really want to still. So one day I would hope to do something with the turtles. But I would say, as far as like state of anime and manga, I'm not super versed in anime. Like I've seen, decent amount of it, but it's not something that I am super qualified to talk about. On the manga front, though, I would say that like it's it sells as well as it does for a reason.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of lessons that American comics could take from that. But they're also two completely different things.
True.
And if you even just look at the titles that are long running, the way that they're handled, it's one of the problems in the American industry right now. Is like you look at Radiant Black as a monthly comic is up to issue number 31 right now. We're putting out issue 31. If you go into a comic store in America, you're not going to see a lot of comic books that are above an issue number 30. Marvel and DC reboot over and over and over with new number ones, and it's diminishing returns every time you do that. But the buying and reading habits of the market have changed so much over the years. And so for whatever reason, there is this feeling with American readers of Western comics, I would say, where they want to start, or this is the perception is that everyone wants to start at issue, like they don't want to jump onto a book with too high of a number.
Yeah.
But if you look at manga, it's the opposite. Like it's accessible and it's volume after volume after volume in a row. And, you look at something like One Piece and how many thousands of stories at this point, and no one thinks that's inaccessible. They're excited to dive into that world. So I think that also looking at, and I'm not even talking creatively about like the different types of storytelling and choices, but like manga can be wild. It can be insane. And I think there's a lot in Western comics that, I don't know, it's a little too reserved, I guess, in some ways. Like comics should be fun. Like they should, grab you and hold you. I also think that like looking at the platforms that a lot of manga are consumed on now, when you're looking at things like Webtoon, but also things like Shonen Jump, they're very accessible. The price point is very accessible. The volume of material is very accessible. And then you also have the relationship between manga and anime where, there's anime driving people to manga and vice versa. And you could say that like, well, we don't have that in Western comics, but we have the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and yet it's the biggest thing in the world, and yet comic sales are not affected. They're not rising as a result of it. So there's a disconnect there for some reason. And I think there are lessons to be learned there. But so far we haven't learned them.
A couple of years back, when the 12th issue was coming out in Radiant Black, you said you already had 36 issues covered now.
Yeah.
What's the position right now? The 31st issues count.
Yeah, so I've got up through about issue 50. We'll end right now. Yeah. We're not planning to start over. We're not planning to end the series. Like, we're in this for the long run and building a library and a universe. And, there are books will end in our line, but they'll end because the story is done.
But it'll continue in other media.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, that depends on how successful the books are.
Yeah. Anyway, wonderful. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, of course. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will get time.
Yep, thank you.